Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about Skylar Neese. Someone had recommended that I talk about this case, and as soon as I looked it up, I was heartbroken. And this is just another reason it's terrifying to have girls and raise daughters. Definitely makes me miss the days when social media wasn't a thing. It's just so scary. If you guys like these type of videos, don't forget to subscribe, like, and let's get to it. Skylar Annette Neese was born February 10th, 1996. Her parents were Mary and Dave, and they actually lived in an apartment right in Magnolia County in West Virginia. Dave, her dad, worked at Walmart at product assembly, and her mom was an administrative assistant in a cardiac lab. Her parents described her as having the brightest eyes, and she was just a ball of joy and energy, and she was just so happy all the time. She was the only child, and she was just the light of their life because she was their only kid. Skylar was in second grade. She ended up going to a community center, which is where they would have different crafts and activities, you know, basketball, sports, things like that. And this is where she met Sheila Eddy, and this was again in second grade, so they were really young and they became inseparable. They became absolute best friends. They instantly took to each other. The only thing is that Sheila didn't go to the same schools as Skylar. Had a lot in common with being the only child. Sheila's parents ended up divorcing, and her dad wasn't able to work because he was disabled. So Sheila ended up spending a lot of time at Skylar's house. I'm sure you guys know, when you grow up and you have a best friend, you end up making yourself at home. You let yourself in the door, you let yourself get some food, like it almost becomes your family. And that's how Sheila was. She would just walk right into the home, and she looked at Skylar's parents almost like her parents. She would sleep over there all the time, and Skylar's parents really took her in, especially because of the situation at Sheila's house. They wanted to make her feel as comfortable and welcome as possible. And when the girls reached high school, Sheila actually transferred to Skylar's high school, and they were so excited because, just more time they could spend together. Skylar absolutely loved school, and she loved working. She worked at the Wendy's that was in her town, and her teacher said she got good grades. She was never a problem. She talked about how she actually wanted to be a criminal lawyer, and she always did really well, whereas Sheila was a little bit wilder. She definitely was more of the rebellion. This is where they met Rachel Schoaf, and Rachel hadn't went to school with either of one of them prior. She actually went to a private religious school, and she also comes from a home of divorce, and she has a half stepbrother that she was never raised with, so she was basically like the only child. The three of them instantly connected and bonded, and they became inseparable, absolute best friends. Well, as you know, when there's best friends, when there's three of them, things can get a little dramatic. So one always ends up feeling left out, especially at that age, because girls, their bodies are changing, your hormones are changing, people are changing and doing things to try to fit in, and it's just a really, really hard time in general. So I know for me, when I was in high school, I had close friends, and it was like three of us, and I know that there was times I definitely felt left out, or I would feel jealous, or I would feel like I wasn't as important as the one friend, and that's really, really common for kids that age. So when all three of them started hanging out, everything was all good. They would talk constantly on the phone, they would text message all the time, they were always on social media, tweeting back and forth at each other, and they were just really tight. As a little bit of time goes by, Skylar starts feeling left out. The reason she starts feeling left out is because Skylar notices that Sheila and Rachel seem as if they're way closer, and they start hanging out without her. They start planning to dress alike, and they start doing things without her, and then parading it around that they did stuff without her on social media and stuff like that. So they're doing it intentionally. The three girls start drinking heavily, they start smoking weed, and they actually go to the same spot all the time. It's down in the backwoods, it's really secluded, a woodsy area, and that's like their hangout spot. But they start getting in trouble, they start getting caught, and this is where Skylar's friends and her parents start telling her, you know, you're really changing, you're not exactly who you used to be, you're acting out, you're not acting like yourself. And actually her parents and Skylar's other friends that were outside of these two friends start telling Skylar, you know, I don't really like Sheila, she's a bad influence on you, it's getting you in trouble, and I feel like you wouldn't be doing these things if it wasn't for her. And you know, they had been friends since 2nd grade, so Skylar kind of just brushed it off. She didn't really care. She was almost entranced by Sheila. She had a really big fascination with her, and looking at the story, I think the reason she had such a big fascination with her is because she had more of a wild side that Skylar didn't have. And something about Skylar really drew people to her because she just put on this act of being the cool girl, you know? People actually started to suspect that Sheila and Rachel were hooking up because, like I said, they started leaving Skylar out. They were always doing things together. Their pictures on their Twitter were just really, really close, even though they both had boyfriends. When Sheila and Skylar really started fighting, and they would both tweet kind of like aggressive things where they're saying something's wrong, but they're not specifically saying what's wrong, you know what I mean? Like people do that kind of on Facebook for attention. Not naming no names, but I know you know what I'm talking about. So this takes us to July 4th, 2012, and Skylar was really upset and depressed and feeling really left out and lonely because Sheila and Rachel decided to hang out that day and specifically didn't invite Skylar, so she was really upset. And this is where Skylar sends out a tweet. And she says in her tweet, sick of being at fucking home. Thanks, friends. Love hanging out with you all too. It was July 5th, 2012. And this is where Skylar worked her typical Wendy shift. She never missed shifts. She loved working because her other friends worked there too. So she worked till 10 p.m. that night. She came home. Her mom and dad were sitting on the couch watching TV, waiting for her to get home. Just typical, chill, relaxing. She came in, she talked to them, was totally normal. She hugged her mom, told her she loved her, she was going to head up for the night. She told her dad she loved him, and she went up to her bedroom. This is where she decided to use a small bench up underneath the window so that she could sneak out, which wasn't anything unusual. She snuck out many times, but she's always came back home. So she sneaks out, and luckily they had just put new security surveillance cameras in her apartment complex. So it actually shows her leaving the apartment complex at 12:31. The security footage shows Skylar leaving at 12:31 out of her window, and it shows her running up to a car, her getting in the car, and then it driving off. So that morning, July 6th, Skylar's dad wakes up to go to work. He doesn't check on Skylar. Like I said, he didn't know she snuck out. So he's supposed to get done work midday. He does. He comes home and he goes to knock on her door because what he always did was he would get done work and then he would let her use his car. That way she could drive to work. So he gets home, he knocks on her door. She's not answering. He thought maybe she's sleeping. It's kind of weird. Then she's not answering some more. He doesn't hear anything. So he walks out of the apartment to go look in her window, and he notices that the window's left open and that she had snuck out. Instantly he panicked, and you know, his heart drops because your baby girl's not where they're supposed to be. So he calls Sheila. Sheila says, I have no idea, and she says that she talked to her at midnight, but that was it. So he's really panicking because even though she snuck out before, she always came home, and not to mention she had that shift at work and she never missed work, so he knew something was up. So after he calls Sheila, he calls Skylar's mom, Mary, and tells her what's going on. And Mary's really relaxed, and she's like, it's fine. She snuck out before. She'll be home. Let's at least wait until her shift starts and see if she shows up because she never misses work. So when she didn't show up to her shift, this is where her parents panicked and freaked out. Of course, they instantly call the police. The police come and they say, oh, she'll be back. She probably just snuck out. She might have ran away. It happens all the time. She'll be back soon. And the parents did not believe this. They knew she always came back, and this just wasn't like her. And this is where they started putting out missing posters and put them everywhere. Sheila acted devastated. She called the family all the time, asking what she could do to help them. She wishes she knew more. She feels so bad. And she was really there for Mary to lean on, sitting in Skylar's room with Skylar's mom, and they were crying and hugging, and she was like, I just miss her so much. Just really playing into really missing her, where Rachel was upset, but she wasn't going out of her way to help. She wasn't calling. She kept more of a distance from the family. A little time goes by, and finally the police decide to start taking this seriously. First police interview they have with Sheila, they instantly know something's wrong with her. She's not acting normal. She seems more concerned about how she's perceived by them, and she's over the top acting upset and over the top acting like she wants to be able to help, and it just seems a little bit phony to them. Police wanted to also talk to Rachel, but she was going on some religious trip camp thing, so they talked to her very quickly on the phone. They said she was very like monotone. She really didn't have emotion behind her voice, and she kept the same story as Rachel. And every time they would ask her, like, go into more detail, she'd be like, I'm not sure. I don't know. You'll have to talk to Sheila. I don't know. You'll have to talk to Sheila. Almost as if Sheila was the ringleader. When Rachel came home from church camp, instead of going right to the police and telling them everything she knew, she kind of like laid low until they came and got her to question her. And she told the exact story, word for word, almost like it was scripted. So the police start digging around, and they're reading social media, and they get a hold of Skylar's journal, and Skylar ended up writing in there some really bizarre things. She, like I said earlier, she was really infatuated with Sheila. She goes on to write about Sheila's very convincing, and she has a way of getting whatever she wants, how she's manipulative, and she's just really, really good at making whatever she wants happen. She even in the journal writes about Sheila's sex life in like grave detail. Like I said, it's almost like she had this infatuation with her and the way she lived, because, like I said, she lived more on the wild side. She even talks in her journal about Sheila getting with girls. And she goes into detail too in her journal about how when they would drink and get drunk, that Sheila and Rachel would hook up, and how it would make her really uncomfortable because they would do it right in front of her. There was a time that they had hooked up and like made out in the bathroom, and Skylar was literally right there. How she was really uncomfortable because they just didn't care and did it right in front of her. I don't care if you're a boy, a girl. I'm not trying to sit in a room and watch two people make out. I don't know. That's a little bit strange, and it makes me feel like they were like throwing it in her face. Police are really digging into all the Twitter posts and Facebook posts and stuff like that, because like I said, there were so many of them. They lived on there, and right after her Wendy's shift is when Skylar wrote on Twitter, "You doing shit like that is why I will never completely trust you." And that was her last tweet. And a lot of people around town were actually suspecting Sheila and Rachel because they were kind of going on with normal life, and they were drinking, partying, bragging about it, not acting as if their best friend has been missing. When Sheila, she's like the headmaster, when she started realizing people were catching on, this is where she decided to go on some rant on Facebook that was a group page that was, you know, looking for Skylar, and she makes this whole post about how she misses her and she can't live her happy life without her. During this time that people were suspecting them, people ended up making these anonymous Twitter accounts, and they were just coming for them, you know, saying things to them like, we know what you did, you know, things of that sort, just really going hard for a good reason, obviously. Now, this is where Sheila could care less. She didn't care. But Rachel, on the other hand, was a little bit different. She was letting all these things get to her. It was freaking her out. She started, you know, having like mental breakdowns. She was just crying. She was acting angry. She was just all over the place, and her parents noticed. So they also had this weird feeling about Sheila and really didn't want her around her. So as I had said, the parents, Rachel's parents, were divorced. Well, because of this, of her well-being, Rachel's dad ended up moving back into the family home with her mom because they didn't want her around Sheila, and Rachel's dad actually lived really close to Sheila. And they also did this so that they could, you know, teamwork together to get their daughter through whatever was going on with her. But they decided not to tell her that her dad was going to move back in. He kind of just moved back in. She came home from school and they like sprung it on her, and she flipped. She was screaming in the streets, yelling, crying, and they ended up having to lock her in her bedroom once they finally like got her in the house. And they called the police and told them, you know, what's going on. They're like, something is really wrong. She's saying she's going to take her life. She is just over the top. We don't know what to do. And listening to this audio, you can hear Rachel in the background screaming and just a mess. So I'm sure the parents were terrified, and the police came and they ended up taking her to a psychiatric ward for 5 days. So the police begin to piece together that it was actually Sheila's Toyota Camry that picked up Skylar that night. And, you know, with their own investigation and, you know, phone records, things like that, the tweets, and they end up looking at their surveillance camera from the complex. Within their investigation, they know Sheila and Rachel knows exactly what happened. They were under the assumption that they probably picked her up and they went to go hang out and smoke and do what they're not supposed to do, and something possibly went wrong. Maybe she overdosed, maybe she drank too much alcohol, got alcohol poisoning or something, and they freaked out and left her, and they're trying to cover it up. But little do they know how evil and what actually happened. So stick with me. Then Rachel tells a little bit of a different story, and she says that they picked her up and she jumped out of the car and ran into the woods, and they tried to chase her, but they couldn't find her, so they left, and then they never saw her again. And then, so they're like, hold on, they finally said something a little bit different. Let me bring Sheila in and see if she's got the same story. They bring Sheila in. She says the exact same thing. So they're like, great. Made up this new story that they're going to stick to. So then they decide to try to intimidate them, scare them, give them a little proof that they know that they're lying. So they're like, all right, we're going to polygraph them. Sheila comes in, she absolutely fails. This is where Rachel's parents are driving her to the polygraph test, and she absolutely freaks out. She jumps out of the moving vehicle, she runs to Sheila's house and is banging on the door looking for Sheila's mom, Tara. And she's like, help, help, help. And this is the point where Rachel's parents knew something bad happened. It's actually where Rachel's parents decided to move in together, and then the whole incident happened with Rachel being put into the psych ward and all that. So 5 days later, after being in the psych ward, she gets released. When she gets released, her parents decide, all right, we're driving you right to the police and doing the polygraph test. So when Rachel gets to the police station for the polygraph test, they ask her like 2 questions, and she instantly reveals everything. Said that Skylar and Sheila ended up going on vacation, and when Skylar came home from the vacation, she told Rachel how she was so annoying, she couldn't stand her anymore, didn't want to be her friend, how Skylar and Sheila fought the whole time. She was just over and done with Skylar, and she needed to go. And her exact words was, she needs to go. What they decided to do was that night they lured her to hang out. They went to pick her up in Sheila's car, and they went to this little wooded spot that they always went to, like I said, drink, and so they could smoke. And they go there. Skylar's not suspecting a thing because they've been to this place many, many times. They got there, they all get out of the car, and they start walking up to their little smoke hangout spot. And Skylar says, oh shoot, I left the lighter in the car. And this is where she turns around, and Sheila and Rachel go 1, 2, 3 together. and they both take out knives, kitchen knives that they stole from home, and this is where they start to repeatedly stab her. Rachel freaks out and she's like, oh my gosh, shaken. I don't think it's her MO. I don't think she would have ever done this if Sheila didn't convince her to personally. Rachel stops stabbing her, and Rachel says that Sheila just couldn't stop. She almost had like a little spark of enjoyment, and she ended up stabbing her 50 times. Like, imagine 1, 2, 3. That is so many times. And when you're going through flesh and bone and all that, I mean, that takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of anger. It definitely takes a crazy person to do that. She says that Skylar tried to run, but Sheila ended up getting her in her knees. So she was like trying to like slowly crawl away. And what's terrible is that she didn't die instantly. She ended up bleeding out, which in her case took a pretty good amount of time, and they watched her sit there and suffer. Rachel says the only thing Skylar said while she was able to talk was why? That's it. Of course, the police asked her why, and she said, we just didn't like her. This is how you know that they pre-planned this. They brought clean clothes, they brought shovels, they brought bleach, they brought gloves, they brought all this stuff to clean it up with because they thought they were gonna dig a 6-foot hole in the ground. Started to dig a hole where they were gonna put her in. And they couldn't dig the hole because the ground was too hard. So they drug her up next to a tree, and they decided, well, we're gonna hide her with some leaves. We're gonna hide her. We're gonna put some branches over, sticks, trash. We're just gonna leave her out here like a piece of shit. Ended up taking Skylar's phone. They just turned it off and like placed it next to her underneath all the trash and everything that they put on top of her. And this is where you know Sheila is truly, truly evil. She gets home and she gets on Twitter. She writes, always keep your cool. January 4th, 2013 rolls around. Sheila doesn't know at this point that Rachel went and outed her. She was kind of catching on and had an idea that she had maybe told police more. Rachel told the police exactly where Skylar was, and they weren't able to go and look around because there was a lot of snow on the ground. But as soon as the snow melted, the police went to the spot where she said she was, and immediately there she was. March 13th, 2013, the police tell the public that they had found her. And right after the police tell the public that they had found Skylar, Sheila writes on Twitter, and this is so sick and deluded that she would write this. It's almost like she liked getting the attention and liked making people wonder. And I definitely think if she didn't get caught, she would have eventually bragged about what she did. I think so. But she wrote on Twitter, and I feel like this is her sly way of trying to brag. She says, we really did 3. So on May 1st, 2013, Rachel ended up taking a plea deal. Guilty to 2nd-degree murder, and she got 15 years in jail. I love you too, baby. She got 15 years in jail, and she's eligible for parole in 10 years. She ended up apologizing to the family, and she was just, every day of trial, crying, and she was just obviously really upset, and it messed her up. It really messed her up. And I think it's pretty obvious, you know, her jumping out of a car and running, and listening to the police where she's in the background screaming and stuff before she went to the psych ward. It's pretty obvious this mentally tortured her. Now, Sheila, on the other hand, when she was arrested, she was actually at a Cracker Barrel with her mom. And when she was arrested, she didn't seem fazed. She was like, Mom, am I gonna be okay? And her mom's like, I don't know. Then when she was in the courtroom, she didn't act fazed. She actually smiled a whole lot. And it reminds me a lot of Casey Anthony, just smiling, and she was like putting on for the cameras. She's playing with her hair and like really worried about how her hair looks. On January 24th, 2014, and she ended up pleading guilty to 1st-degree murder and got life in prison with the possibility of parole in 15 years. Do I think she'll get it? No. She never apologized to the family. She never spoke out. She just, oh, I love you. She just went about her business. Pray she never, ever, ever gets out of jail. So that is the story of Skylar Neese. I don't even know what to say at the end of this because it's just terrible. It's just such a terrible, terrible story. But I hope you guys like this video, and I'll see you soon.